Hey guys, before we get started today, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Amanda Jane over on The Darkest Hour. Please, after this video, if you haven't already, go over and subscribe and show them some love. Without further ado, please enjoy.
My late brother saved my life. His name was Morgan, and he died of COVID in 2020. He already had underlying health conditions brought on by his time in the military that made it unable for him to fight off the infection after he got sick. He served in the Army for several years, and when he appeared to me, he was dressed in his full military gear. Not his uniform, but tactical gear, like I'd only seen in photos of him overseas. It happened a couple of years ago. There was a fair in Winnipeg. I'm American and live in Minnesota. Winnipeg's right over the border, and me and my friends would always go back and forth over the border to party. We saw advertisements at the gas station for the traveling fair. All of us got excited, and we knew we had to go. The next Saturday, me and my 3 friends all piled into my car with only our passports and some cash. It was later into the night, and the fair was slowly starting to clear out. There must have been an hour left before they officially closed. Most of the vendors and rides were in the process of shutting down. We'd been there all day, and I know most of us were out of money by then. It was exchanged for fair food and stuffed animals that we won from games. I still have a few stuffed cow keychains that I won that night. I worked hard for these stupid softball-sized cows, and I got quite a few. A lot of the games had them as prizes, and I made it my mission to win as many as possible that night. I know my final tally was in the double digits, more than 9, that's for sure, but I only ended up leaving the fair with 3. I was on the furthest left side of the group, with my hands full heading towards the exit, and from behind me, I heard my brother's voice shout, "Hey, shitstain." And that's what he used to call me. It was a nickname for me, a term of endearment. Instead of little bro, he called me shitstain, even when he was in a good mood. And my parents never stopped his behavior, so shitstain was able to slowly replace my real name over the years. Wild to think about later in life, but that's what we got going on during this period of my life. And remember, he fought for our country, so cut him some slack. So, from directly behind me, I hear, "Hey, shitstain." And instinctively, I flinch and dive, because most of the time after hearing that, there's going to be something launched in my direction following the greeting. It was an uncontrollable reaction that sent me flying down into the muddy ground on my knees. And that's when I lose the majority of my stuffed cow keychains, sinking into the muck in front of me. At that precise moment, though, I was more distracted, watching a helium tank shuttle over my head like a rocket after skipping on the ground a few feet in front of me. The canister barely cleared me and shattered the bones of the legs of the person behind me. If I wouldn't have ducked, that metal cylinder could have decapitated me easily, or caved in my chest if it missed my head. Either outcome, I'd have been without major organs functioning if it hit me. Some drunk carny was loading a bunch of tanks into the back of a truck. One fell off and landed just at the right angle to crack the top and send it like a bottle rocket. It was pandemonium for the people around that saw it happen. There was a cacophony of screams as some rushed to the man's aid and others looked on in frozen disbelief. The carny actually tried to get in his truck and drive away, but more people jumped in to stop him. This is all happening around me at the same time. It's hard to explain what it's like right after almost dying. I was in shock, sitting on my knees there in the mud. I began crying, and I couldn't lift myself up. My muscles refused to move. Still looking for my brother, dressed in his full tactical suit, camo pants. I started looking for anyone fitting that description, which you'd think would be easy. Everyone, though, was in civilian clothing. Behind me, a woman screamed, "He's losing a lot of blood." And in front of me, I saw an ambulance speeding right for me. and the shock of near death quickly wore off when the threat of real death presented itself. I got up and moved aside. I picked up the cows that hadn't been run over and walked to the front gate to meet up with my friends. I didn't see that they had run behind me to help the guy during the commotion. When we did all get back together, they were all quiet, experiencing a shock of their own after helping with the guy's injury. He was in pretty bad shape by the time medics were loading him up. The tank basically tore his leg in half, and one of my friends had to use his shirt as a tourniquet until help arrived. They didn't even see how close I'd come to getting my head taken off by it. I told my mom this story when I got home, and it made her cry. She said my brother would be my guardian angel when he died. Not being a religious person, I never put weight into her saying that, and this experience didn't make me go out and get a Bible, but it did make me believe in something more, something past our skin suits. And what do you think? I told my friend this story, and she told me her grandmother reached out to her in the same kind of way. She wasn't in the middle of a near-death experience, but when she was little, she was riding her bike on a long stretch of road when the chain slipped and she lost control. Her bike went off the side of the road into a ditch, and she thinks that she was briefly knocked unconscious after the crash because she remembered leaving the road. But when she opened her eyes again, she was looking directly up into the blue sky, and her grandma was standing over her. She tells her, "You're all right, honey," then backs out of her line of view, so all she can see is the sky again. When she sat up, she was all alone in the ditch. She had to walk her bike up the rest of the way. The wheels were now bent along with the previous chain issue. When she got home, she had the same conversation with her mom that I did with my mom, claiming our deceased relatives are now guardian angels. Have any of you ever had an old family member come help when you needed them? Not everybody in my family is good, and there's more than a few that I wouldn't want checking on me in the afterlife. I don't really know how to feel about this then. It sounds good until you consider my dead, creepy great-uncle. I'm sure that he would have loved to be my guardian angel. What's to stop him from watching me sleep? Am I taking this idea too far? I think these are the questions that need to be asked if we're supposed to find a foundational understanding of what's after our flesh cube. I'd like to conclude this with a wise quote to encompass all of this. Despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. Despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage. Someone will say, what is lost can never be saved. Despite all my rage, I'm still just a rat in a cage.
She started showing up in my dreams. Each dream was the same. I'd be watching from above, spectating something I didn't quite understand at first. It was always the bedroom of a child. In the middle of this bedroom resided a bed, where a kid would always be fast asleep. The first time I had this dream, I was deeply confused. I had this uncontrollable feeling of dread, digging deep into my chest. Impulsively, I looked around. That's when I first saw her. A woman just standing in the middle of the room, watching the child sleep. This woman had long, mangy black hair. Her skin was snow white and her neck was tilted in an impossible degree to the side. Every time I'd had this dream, I'd always be behind the woman, at just the right angle where her face was shielded from the view. Despite this, however, her entire, horrifyingly tall body was still visible, wearing only a raggedy white t-shirt, length going down past her knees. I noted how bruised and dirty her calves and feet were. Then, as my eyes traced her shoulders, I noticed them moving up and down, always mesmerizing and always constant. I kept following down to her arms, where I made a terrifying realization that made my blood run cold. She was holding something. Within her right hand, with fingers bloody and cracked, fingernails long and shaded dark yellow, was an object. A knife. In every dream, the woman would inch closer to the child. In every dream, the movement would be so slight, so subtle, that each step would fail to make a sound. As she'd get closer to the kid, she'd always raise the knife above her head, ready to strike. And then, just like that, the dream would end. And I'd be back in the same spot again in another child's room. That loop continued for months. Every time I fell asleep, I'd be transported to the same spot. I'd watch the same woman. Helplessly, I'd see the sequence unfold. The steps, the knife in the air, the sudden cut to the next scene. It was as if my mind was protecting me from what I had just witnessed, protecting me from the truth. Then last week, something strange started happening. These dreams started transcending my nighttime sleeps. Last week, I started seeing the woman, the scenes, every time my eyes were closed, regardless of the time spent shut. I got to the point where every time I blinked, every time I rested my eyes, every time my eyelids shut, no matter the time elapsed, I'd see her again. I'd be stuck watching her cursed, horrific appearance, and the unrelenting loop that would follow. I wish that's where the story ended. Last night in my dream, I once again found myself in a room. Except this time, something was different. I immediately made the connection. This wasn't some random kid's room. This was my room. My more terrifying discovery, however, came when I noticed the second abnormality from my usual dream. I was in my bed, and I already knew what I'd see next. Apprehensively, I lifted my head, terrified of what I'd see. Lo and behold, I saw her, the woman from my dreams, except this time I could see her face. Her eyes were darker than anything I'd seen in my life. Blood was trickling down from her forehead, and her nose seemingly attempted to be torn off, and it hung on for dear life. The woman's most petrifying feature, however, was her smile. The corners of her mouth had been sewn to her cheekbones, stretching her lips and creating an uncanny, inhuman grin that spanned the entire width of her face. I hadn't been able to tell from behind, but now that I was facing her, I could unmistakably identify why her shoulders were always moving. She was giggling. Not enough to make a discernible sound, but just enough to push me over the edge. Wishing in that moment I just died instantaneously, instead of suffering through whatever would happen next. The woman's giggle was growing more maniacal as she inched closer, slowly as she made her way to my bed. I was going to die. Then, by some miracle, I awoke. I was in my bed in total darkness, except the woman was gone. In my dazed state, my eyelids shut for just a second longer than an instantaneous blink. In the blink of an eye, the woman was back, knife in the air, coming down at terrifying speed. And just before I pierced my chest, I shot my eyes open again. I sprinted to my desk and ripped off a roll of tape. I taped my eyelids open and sat there, praying the woman wouldn't return. It's been almost 30 hours. As my bloodshot eyes get heavier and the bags under my eyes get more swollen, I don't know how much longer I can resist. I tried caffeine. I've tried exercising. But I can feel my eyelids getting closer together. And sadly, it's only a matter of time.
At the beginning of March, we had a pretty big storm out here that knocked out the power and brought down some trees. Nothing on our property was damaged, but it took more than a weekend to get all the branches and debris out of the yard and driveway. And there was one other thing. Someone had tied a rowboat to our dock. It was covered with barnacles, and the wood had deteriorated, like it had spent the last decade at the bottom of the ocean. Most of the paint had chipped and worn away, but I could see the whole thing used to be painted blue, with white trim. The side of it read, "Oh, Susanna." The vessel didn't look seafaring by any means. Neither me or my husband are very boat savvy, and our dock isn't big enough for a full motorboat to sit at. It's got enough for a few chairs, and fishing at most. We purchased this property because it was beautiful and isolated. Occasionally, when the weather's good, we get our grandkids jumping off of it. But that's mainly what it's been used for. It's attached to the backyard, and that's pretty much the only way that you can reach it besides swimming at it from the opposite way. Our beach access doesn't have California sand. It's pebbles and bigger. A rocky man-made half-circle that connects our backyard to the dock. We have a security camera that faces into our backyard. It doesn't reach as far as the water, but it gets the whole grassy part of the yard. Our back deck and a little bit of the driveway. Everything that leads from the dock is in view, but we didn't see anyone cut through our yard. Not towards the dock or away from it. But the boat clearly hadn't just washed into the shoreline because someone had lassoed it to the dock with a brown rope. Again, though, unless the owner tied the boat off and then jumped back into the water and swam away, there was no way our cameras wouldn't have caught them. Our whole system cost us a pretty penny. It's motion activated, records in crystal clear HD. Regardless, there was still a rickety broken boat on our property with splintered wood and tetanus nails that neither of us wanted our grandkids playing on. We joked that it was actually the perfect size boat for our little dock, and that we'd been considering getting something small for us to push around on the water, but it wasn't going to be this boat. We didn't know what to do with it, though. Pushing it back into the water would have just littered the seafloor by the dock. And it was way too big for my husband, Santiago, to lift and move on his own. So we thought we'd ask our son-in-law to break it apart the next time he brought the kids. It let out an eerie creak every time the waves pushed it around, almost like the boat was singing, but the current wasn't strong enough for it to fully drift back. Santi carefully placed a foot inside the boat, making sure to avoid the exposed nails. And then from under one of the benches, he pulled out a vintage Sears tackle box made of metal and copper. It was the only thing inside the boat, and when he handed it to me to climb back out, I held it up, found an engraving on the underside that said, Roebuck and Company, 1940. It was in pristine condition. No rust, no dents. I couldn't believe my eyes. Then we popped it open. We saw that it was filled with wooden lures. They all looked to be hand-carved. Some of the lures we were pulling out were so intricately crafted that they resembled small art pieces rather than fishing gear. The inside of the box was also completely dry. We closed it up and walked back into our home where we dumped it out onto the table. There must have been more than 20 different lures, a bunch of extra hooks scattered across the tablecloth. When we were done looking at all of them, we put all except for one back into the tackle box. Santi took a dragon-shaped one because he thought it looked really cool, wanted to hang it on his rearview mirror. He put that one in his coat pocket before we went to bed. Later that night, our house alarm went off. The panel said that our back patio door had been tampered with, but the motion sensor didn't pick up anything. None of the lights outside were activated. Santi got out of bed to check around the house and immediately runs back into the room telling me that every door in the house was wide open. He ran back to grab his rifle. I followed him out of bed and I stood behind him as he went from room to room checking for an intruder. When we were unable to locate the source, we checked the camera feed. They didn't capture anything or anyone, but at the exact same time and speed, you can see our front, side, and back doors swing open. It was so unsettling, and with no explanation as to how it happened, all we could do was lock everything back up and hope it didn't happen again. I think it shook Santi more than he let on, because he grabbed his rosary from the dresser and slept with it in his hand that night. The next morning he called our son-in-law and asked him to come out to help move the boat. They made a plan for that weekend. We then went downstairs, and the house was filled with a disgusting odor, like a fish market in the summer. When we returned to the kitchen, the tackle box that we had brought in the night before now looked eroded, oxidized, and rusted. It was also the source of the smell. Seaweed and rocks were stuck in the chipped metal. It was the same tackle box, with the same engraving on the bottom, but now it looked like all of the years of wear and tear caught up to it, overnight. I made Santi take it outside, and he brought it all the way back to the boat, returning it right where he found it. But the energy in the house still felt off. It was the morning, and a gorgeous sunrise was about to come through the window, but the house, it still felt cold. I couldn't escape that spooked feeling as I'd walked around the house. It felt like we'd brought a presence into the home, and it wouldn't leave, like someone standing over your shoulder when you're alone in a room. I'm not one of those crystal ball horoscope ladies, but I felt like I could comprehend what it meant to feel an energy shift, like when the air feels different before a thunderstorm. The hair on my arm stood up, and I felt like my baseline was staying comfortably in fight or flight mode. In the house that I'd spent decades in, I now felt like something was waiting to grab me from every corner. When the weekend rolled around, David, our son-in-law, came down with his truck and an axe to break the boat into smaller pieces that could easily be loaded up and moved. Me and my granddaughter, Nevaeh, watched the boys work on the boat from the patio. She walked inside to get a soda from the fridge, but came back with that small little dragon lure, the one that Santi had taken from the tackle box. I'd forgotten all about it until she showed it to me. Just like the tackle box it came from, the wooden lure looked worn down and broken. The hook was dull and misshapen, and Nevaeh noted that it was stinky. I told her to throw it in the yard. I'd have one of the boys take care of it. Where did she find it? I asked. I didn't think she would have walked all the way up to the bedroom and gotten into Santi's coat, and she didn't. She says she almost stepped on it by the refrigerator. Wow, that could have been a doctor's visit. She got lucky avoiding it. Standing on the back deck, she winds up and throws the dragon lure as far as she can into the grass of the backyard. Right after it hits the ground, I hear Nevaeh say, "Grandma, look." She's pointing out to the bushes on the right side of the yard, and out from under the leafy branches pops the scariest coyote I've ever seen. It emerged from the bushes looking like a demon from way down low. The sight of it made me use the Lord's name in vain and grab Nevaeh to go back inside. From the kitchen window, we both watched the coyote slink into the yard. It looked dead on all accounts. One of its eyes were dangling on its cheek. Its fur was patchy with mange. Sticks and leaves were tangled in its hair, and the eye that was still in its head, it was foggy and white. Its face had on a permanent snarl, but I was surprised at how fast it moved despite its condition. It entered the yard with a sort of limp and stared back at us with its one eye. Then it turned its head towards where Nevaeh had thrown the lure and crossed the yard in expeditious leaps. It picked up the dragon lure in its mouth and then swiftly exited the yard where it had entered. I'd never seen anything like it before. When I told the boys about it, they thought it was strange too. It's common to see wildlife where we are. I've seen a few coyotes on the property previously, but none of them quite like this one. None of them quite bold enough to come out in the middle of the day like that. After David and Nevaeh left with the remnants of the boat in the back of his truck, Santi and I walked out to the bushes where the coyote had come from, and there was fur and what looked like bits of decayed flesh stuck in some of the lower branches. That's when Santi also told me that when he went back out to the boat with David, the tackle box he'd put back was gone. Nowhere to be found, even after the last piece of the wood was loaded. The only silver lining to the story is that the removal of the boat, the disappearance of the tackle box, they helped my house get back to normal, back to being our home again. I'd be lying, though, if I said that I didn't think about this whole incident anytime I look out onto the dock.
Did you hear that? My wife asked, poking her head into the office. Hear what? I said as I glanced up from my computer. That. It sounded like a bird trapped in our attic. I got up and went to the living room. All I could hear were distant cars and dogs barking outside. I don't hear anything. I swear it's a bird. It was whistling. I moved to the kitchen, trying to discern the noise. If it makes you feel better, I'll go up there and shoot whatever's bothering you. No, don't kill it. Just go up there and see what it is. Fine. I made my way toward the garage, ruffled my toddler's hair as I passed by in the dining room. You doing good, buddy? Yes, Daddy. I wrenched the door open, finding myself in our garage. Right above my head was the attic door. I shuddered. I hated going up there. Ever since we moved in, the space felt spooky, like another world was living above our heads. Careful, Daddy. I spun to the kitchen doorway. My toddler was watching me with a fearful expression. Hey, sweetie, I didn't see you there. It's not safe. Why not? That's where the kitty lives. The kitty? What kitty? The kitty that speaks to me. Sometimes it whispers in my ears while I sleep. It's not very nice. I locked eyes with him for a moment. Remember, those are dreams, and dreams aren't real. Okay, Daddy. I sighed wearily as I ascended the ladder. The thing was narrow, and I could barely haul myself up without falling off. Next house we buy, I'm installing a bigger one, I muttered to myself. I reached the empty space and shined my phone's flashlight into the darkness. The area felt cold for the middle of summer, like it was harboring a wintry climate. Are there any birds up here? I shouted. If you are, it's time to leave. I bumped my fist against a slanted beam, half expecting a robin or a titmouse to come fluttering out, but there were no signs of anything. I started back down, and as soon as my left foot hit the lowest rung, a sharp whistle crashed into my ears. Did you hear that? My wife shouted from the kitchen. The whistle grew in volume, mixed with a twinge of insanity. It's the kitty! My son's voice drifted in from the house. I climbed back up and hoisted myself onto the attic's floor. I searched the rafters, hoping to catch sight of some deranged bird. The volume increased and I doubled over, a burning sensation hitting my ears. Finally, the noises stopped. I glanced up into the rafters, noticing something watching me. Whatever it was slinked down and landed next to me. It slipped past soundless, like a predatory cat, and headed for the ladder, moving its dark form with effortless grace. Honey? What's going on? Catherine, I wanted to scream, but my voice refused. I tried to move, but my muscles disobeyed. I was paralyzed and mute, watching this panther-like entity creep toward the exit. Honey? I'm getting concerned. Should I call your uncle? Jesus, Catherine, just go. Someone, please help. I managed to reach out and pull myself up by a beam, and swing a hand out toward the creature. The thing turned and focused its yellow eyes on me. Its slimy lips pursed and emitted the most unholy sound. And then I passed out. An hour later, the EMTs found me sprawled on the garage floor. My nose and 2 ribs were broken. My ears were bleeding, and I had 2 gashes on my chest. The paramedics lifted me carefully and carried me out on a stretcher. I'm not sure when I arrived at the hospital. It's been maybe 2 days. I still can't speak, and every time I open my mouth, a painful wheeze comes out. And my ears, they work on and off, so I miss half of everything that's said. At least I have control over my arms and legs again, and thankfully Catherine and Joey are safe. They're at my dad's trying to wrap their brains around what happened. My uncle checked the attic, and he said there's nothing up there but a few scratch marks in the wood. All I could do was rest in the hospital room and type this experience on my phone. I can't sleep. All I can think about is what that thing was, how did it get up there, and if it will ever come back.
I used to travel for work back in the 90s. I took pictures for a lot of those coffee table books you flip through once and never open again. One of those books happened to be about caves, so I had to go inside a bunch of caves. I told the publisher up front that I wouldn't be crawling, rappelling, or diving through anything. I didn't get paid enough for that. I'm not exactly claustrophobic, but I'm certainly not a fan of cramped spaces either. My biggest fear was falling down, breaking a leg, and what it would take to be rescued. I'd have to wait until I missed my check-in time before rescue crews even came looking. The first 5 or 6 caves were easy. Most of them had marked passages, very touristy, so I never had to worry about getting lost. I really only had problems with the one in Utah, or maybe it was the one in Wisconsin. I swear when you're constantly hopping around like that, one place blends into another, and they're all kind of the same. It's like when you think you'll remember the people from high school forever, but then you turn 40 and realize you forgot most of their names. Either way, I was supposed to go to a well-known cave system that groups of people explored every weekend. It was another popular spot like all the others, but I was going on a weekday, so I didn't expect to see anyone else around. As usual, I let everyone know where to send search and rescue if I failed to check in, and I entered the cave. Right away, it was different. The other caves were littered with support beams and rails installed over the years, but this one had little to no alterations. I suspected I might have found the wrong entrance, but it was a big open area, so I kept going. You never know what hidden spot was going to be a lucky break, especially back then, before millions of photos were a Google search away. I walked for maybe 15 or 20 minutes before the path split into different tunnels. Thankfully, I had a whole roll of fluorescent green marking ribbon. After another 10 minutes or so, my tunnel began to narrow, and it came to what I thought was a dead end, but then I heard a man calling out for help. He was desperate. You could tell how frightened he was. When I looked closer, I saw the path didn't end so much as drop straight down. The hole was rocky and still getting tighter, but I could see where the man had installed climbing anchors and rope lines. I let him know I was there, and he cried with relief. He said his name was Greg, and he'd been trapped since Sunday. I remember realizing at the time that meant he'd been stuck for a couple days, so I guess this was a Tuesday. He tried to rappel down that narrow hole, and his ropes tangled. Next thing he knew, he was bouncing off the walls all the way to the bottom, and now he couldn't move. There was nothing I could do except for get help. He wanted me to try to pull him up myself, but there was just no way. Even if I was strong enough, who knew what condition he was in, or what extra damage moving him would do? I wanted to make damn sure that I didn't forget where he was, so I tied one end of my green ribbon to his first anchor, and I let it unwind behind me. Maybe I was being paranoid, but if there was ever a time for overkill, this seemed like the moment. It only lasted as far as where the path started to split off, but that was my main concern anyway. After that, it was almost a straight shot out of the caves. Altogether, with the trek through the woods and back to my car, it took almost an hour just to get on the road. I called the police from the nearest gas station, and rescue crews met me there so I could lead them back to Greg. When we got back to the parking area, I started back toward the cave, and one of the guys stopped me, saying that I was going the wrong way. I assured him that this was the same path I had followed before, and they confirmed I must have gone to the wrong cave. The one I was leading them to was supposed to be off limits due to numerous fatal accidents. I led them all the way back to the hole Greg descended. My ribbon was still there, tied to his anchors, but Greg didn't answer when we called out to him. I was made to wait outside and feared the worst. Eventually, more crews came with bigger equipment, and they worked late into the night. Finally, I saw them carry out a body bag. Greg hadn't made it. I felt like I lost a friend. A man that I'd just been speaking to was gone. The rescue worker I met approached me, and I figured he was just going to give me the bad news, but he started questioning me instead. He asked me things that I had already answered several times: how long I had known Greg, When was the last time I spoke with him? What exactly was I doing there? How had I found that specific entrance? What was my publisher's name? How could they contact him? Finally, a couple of police officers joined us and asked me to answer some follow-up questions at the station. They took my ID and drove me down there in the back of their squad car. I started wondering if Greg fell because someone had sabotaged his equipment. Hell, I started wondering all sorts of crazy scenarios. It would be my luck to get lost, find a dying man, and then get blamed for his murder. Exactly my luck. It was a long night of answering the same questions over and over, but eventually I got a few answers of my own. They hadn't recovered the body of a man who died that day. They recovered the body of a man who had been in that hole for several months. His wife had reported him missing, and it was assumed that he became trapped in the caves, but they were never able to find him. And if I had only stumbled upon him that day, how the hell did I know his name? The only answer I can come up with is that Greg's spirit reached out to me for help, to give his family closure so he could rest. Either that or another man was in that hole, and he took off when I went to get help. Honestly, I'm not sure which would be more creepy.
I had my appendix removed 3 days ago, emergency surgery, in and out same day. Everything went fine. Recovery is going pretty normal, but when I checked my fitness app this morning, something was wrong. My smartwatch logged 2,847 steps during my surgery. I was under general anesthesia, strapped to the operating table, unconscious for about 2 hours and 14 minutes, according to my medical records. My arms were restrained at my sides the entire time. The nurses confirmed this when I called to ask. So, why does my watch say I walked almost 3 miles between 2:17 p.m. and 4:31 p.m. on Tuesday? I thought it was a glitch, so I googled it. Apparently, smartwatches can log phantom steps from vibrations or arm movements. Elevators can trigger it, so can washing machines. It made sense. I was about to dismiss it when I noticed something else. My heart rate data. During surgery, my heart rate was monitored by the hospital equipment. Steady and normal. The anesthesiologist's notes confirm this. I requested my records this morning and went through every page. Nothing unusual, but my smartwatch recorded something different. At 2:43 p.m., my heart rate spiked to 189 beats per minute. It stayed elevated for 6 minutes, then dropped back to normal. At 3:12 p.m., it happened again. 201 beats per minute for 4 minutes. Then again at 3:58 p.m., 176 beats per minute for 8 minutes. The hospital monitors showed nothing during these times. Steady 72 beats per minute throughout the entire procedure. I was playing Candy Crush on my phone last night, trying to distract myself when I decided to check the GPS data. That's when everything got worse. My watch tracks location, and during surgery it should have shown me stationary at the hospital. Instead, there's a gap. From 2:17 p.m. to 4:31 p.m., no location data was recorded, like my watch couldn't figure out where I was, or like I wasn't anywhere the GPS satellites could see. I called the hospital again and asked if there were any complications during surgery. Anything unusual, power outages, equipment failures, anything. They said no. Everything was routine. I was monitored the entire time and never woke up, never moved. The OR staff confirmed I was unconscious and restrained from the moment anesthesia took effect until I was wheeled into recovery. But my watch says I was walking. My watch says my heart was racing. My watch says I was nowhere. Last night I had a dream I was walking down a white hallway. Fluorescent lights overhead. The floor was cold linoleum, and I wasn't wearing any shoes. I could feel every step, the texture of the floor, the slight stick of something dried on the tiles. I walked and walked, but the hallway never ended. There were doors on both sides, but they were all locked. I tried every single one. Some had windows, but they were frosted. I could see shadows moving behind them, but couldn't make out what they were. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that looked different. Heavier. Metal. It had a small window at eye level. When I looked through it, I saw myself on the operating table. The doctors were working. My chest was rising and falling with the ventilator, but I was standing in the hallway watching. Then I woke up. My feet were dirty. There was a white towel dust on my sheets and underneath my fingernails. I live on the second floor and all my floors are hardwood. I'm looking at my smartwatch now. It's logging steps. I'm sitting perfectly still in my chair typing this, but the step count is going up. 10,479, 10,480, 10,481. I haven't moved in 20 minutes. The watch is still on my wrist. I can feel it. But when I look down, I can see through it slightly. Like it's not entirely here anymore. Like I'm not entirely here. I'm going to take it off, but I'm scared of what happens when I do. What if the steps are the only thing keeping me tethered? What if when I stop walking, I go back to that hallway? The one I was in while they cut me open. The one I'm apparently still walking through.
Hello, my name is Janet W. I'm a surgeon from the tri-state area, born and raised in Connecticut, then hopped around New Jersey and New York, working at different children's hospitals. Working in the industry, I've been trained to resist the emotional inputs that tell my receptors to pause even momentarily. It would be hard to focus on the surgery itself if I'm too focused on the tragic reasons why I'm doing my job. But still, it's equally as defeating and saddening when we lose one. This is a perfect segue, bringing me to the part where I explain why I do or do not believe in ghosts. I used to not even entertain the idea of ghosts. I believe in reincarnation, and I still wholeheartedly do. But a patient's first-hand account of the afterlife really made me rethink the idea of the other side. A liminal space between life and death. Time isn't the same time you and I work with here on Earth. I believe that their time is different from ours. How, I couldn't begin to understand. That's knowledge only granted after death. But if I manage to bring you back to life after you die, are you able to remember the in-between? I think so. People die and come back to life every day. Let's say you're a 14-year-old freshman pitcher. You throw a heater that gets sent straight at you. A ball going 100 miles an hour off the bat. It will make a 60-foot trip back in half a second. Your eyes see the ball instantly. But it takes about 1/4 of a second for the brain to process danger and send a motor signal to move your glove. You're also most likely square to the batter, where you try to regain footing after the pitch. But by the time the body starts to react, the ball is already smashed into your chest with blinding accuracy, causing a cardiac rupture where the muscle wall of your heart had split open from the pure blunt force trauma. Hopefully, your coach or someone in the crowd knows enough to immediately begin to perform CPR on you until paramedics can take over. Then, if you're lucky enough, you see me, and we're able to fix you all up with some emergency open-heart surgery. But by the time you're waking up, you've died 7 or 8 times since then, clinically flatlining and needing to be resuscitated, starting all the way back at the field. I guess I'll stop saying you as the character and let it be known that this was a real story that I was part of. The 14-year-old was a real boy. I was working the late shift that night, but I spent most of those hours sitting in that kid's room, talking to him. His mom and dad stayed as late as they could, but he had a baby brother that needed to get home. They were coming back the next morning. It was thought that he'd be sleeping until the next day when the family would have time to sneak back in and pretend they'd been there all night. But sometime during the middle of the night, he woke up and found the help button on his bed. When the nurse went in there, he was naturally confused and scared, waking up where he was and in the condition he was in. By the time I entered, we were able to calm him down. I told him everything that had happened up to that point and then asked him what he remembered. This was to do a quick, non-invasive cognitive check. I knew if he replied to my question with a duh, I was going to have to call in a team. Anything other than that, or different, I would have been satisfied with, as I wasn't even expecting him to be awake yet. But there he was, sitting upright in the dark room, slowly panning his head left to right, trying to figure out where he was still. And it was a relief when he was able to form a sentence and respond clearly. But when I addressed that and was able to move onto the actual substance of what he was trying to say to me, that's when, for the first time in my career, I was convinced of the afterlife. Given the circumstances, I'd already been aware of what happened leading up to this. It was fascinating to hear his recollection of what he'd experienced. I'm going to call him Cody. So when Cody got dropped by the baseball, he said that it only hurt for a second, like someone had punched him in the stomach. With that fourth of a second he had, he knew that it wasn't a fist that had hit him, though. He took a few steps back after being hit and recalls the field looking different. The colors of the grass, the opposing team's jerseys looked muted. He saw his coach running out to the mound. His strides were almost comically slow and exaggerated as he made his way towards him. But it was the look of horror on his face that Cody didn't understand yet. I think this needs to be noted because I thought it was just creepy. Looking around, Cody also said that there were random adults walking on the playing field, but his teammates were all staring at Cody, or at least in Cody's direction. I'm sure their eyes were all staring at what he found when his coach finally got to the mound and went down on his knees. That's when Cody saw him start doing CPR on his own body. To make sure I'm following along straight, I ask, "You saw your coach performing CPR on you?" And he said, "Yeah, but he was standing right next to him as he did it." Then the paramedics came, and he almost didn't get into the ambulance with them before they shut the door. But it felt like magnets were in his chest, pulling him towards it. Sitting in the back of the ambulance watching the paramedics work on him, he realized he wasn't really sitting. He also wasn't really standing. Any physical activity had been reduced to a leisurely float. A current he let pull him like a fishing lure attached to his body. There were other people floating, wandering like they'd lost their way. Cody described viewing the operating room from above, looking down on us while we operated on him. He correctly identified the number of surgeons in there and could even hear us talking to each other. After watching us for a while, he had a vision of his parents in the waiting room, and somehow that vision acted like a portal that moved him into the waiting room with his mom and dad. They couldn't hear him, and his hands went through them when he reached out. His mom was crying, sitting in the chairs by the large fish tank that we have, and his dad was talking to a nurse who was writing on a clipboard. Cody said that he didn't like the waiting room. There were other floaters in there that scared him. I believe when he said floaters, he meant people in the same state that he was in. In other words, ghost mode. Some of them were kids, most were adults, but all of them looked like they were filled with misery and still wearing the wounds that represented their exit from the world. From this world. Some of the people Cody told me about I'd seen earlier that day. A 6-year-old boy torn apart by 2 Rottweilers. A woman with blonde hair and a teacup-sized hole in her face from a self-inflicted whoopsie. Although I didn't interject, believing my comment would only make him feel more uncomfortable, his near-perfect description of these people gave me chills. Cody said he thought he would be trapped in there forever with them. Going back and forth from the vision portal he described, he'd check in on how we were doing, saying he thought that his body had been laying there for days, but in reality the surgery lasted almost 6 hours. We had to open his chest, stitch the torn muscle of his heart, and coax it back into rhythm. When we finally rolled him into recovery, his skin was pale as milk, and his chest was bound in tape and wires, but we saved him. I asked if he remembered going back into his body, or how did that work? And he said that he was in the waiting room with his parents when the magnet feeling became the strongest he'd felt it. He said that the stronger it got, the more he started to feel physical pain again. He'd almost forgotten about the physical pain that he'd stepped away from. The portal pulled him back in without him having to envision it first. That's when he used the little strength that he had left to pull himself into a seated position on the hospital bed where I found him. Ever since then, if a kid flatlines on the table while we're performing surgery on them, I like to look up and wave them back down. I don't do it expressively to call attention to myself. I just think that's where they're going to be hanging out, and my acknowledgement of their situation might entice them back into their bodies. I think it's worked more than a few times. I don't know. I'm sure credit should go to the medical team doing their darndest to keep that pulse steady. I'm also hands deep in that process too, and who knows? It could be a little superstitious. And I definitely wouldn't write it in any medical thesis I'd ever have my name on. Maybe spirits don't float to the ceiling and I'm discreetly waving to nobody. But maybe my little waves their guidance back home. Who knows? I don't, so I can't say it doesn't work either. I work as a ski and snowboard instructor at a major resort in the Rockies. I know my mountain better than I know my apartment. I'm a pretty rational guy, and if you told me this story, I would assume hypothermia and lack of oxygen. But I was lucid. I was freezing, and I owe my life to something that shouldn't exist. This happened a few winters ago, late season. I was doing a final sweep of the upper bowls after the lifts closed, just checking boundary markers before heading back down. The forecast was wrong, completely wrong. At 5:30 p.m., a whiteout hit the summit like a physical wall. 1 minute I had 50 feet of visibility, the next it was 0. You know that silence in a massive blizzard? It's not quiet, it's kind of terrifyingly silent, like cotton wool stuffed into your ears. I couldn't even hear the wind. I only felt it whipping my face. I was instantly and completely disoriented. I couldn't tell up from down or the fall line from the boundary rope. I knew I was sliding off towards a section that we call the scree gap, a steep, jagged drop-off that would be fatal in the dark. My phone was useless, buried under layers, likely with no service. Panic is a luxury you can't afford up there, but I was seconds away from it. I had maybe 2 hours before the cold would take me. I stopped dead, leaning on my poles, trying to find any visual cue. And then about 50 feet away, through the dense, whipping snow, a light appeared. It wasn't a beam. It didn't look like a headlamp or the reflection of a snowmobile. It was a perfect sphere of intense, soft yellow-white glow, about the size of a baseball. It didn't appear to have a power source or structure. No lens. It was just pure floating light. This light seemed to ignore the blizzard. It didn't cast shadows, and the snow around it just vanished from view, leaving a perfectly defined area of light that seemed completely immune to the conditions. I knew every piece of rescue gear on that mountain. Nothing can do that. It began to move slowly and deliberately, holding a consistent distance from me. Just fast enough to force me to follow, but slow enough that I wouldn't lose it. Every fiber of my mind was screaming, "Get a grip. Run the other way. This light's probably not even real." But I was freezing, lost, completely out of options. The light was the only thing giving the world any shape. I pushed off my thoughts, relying entirely on the impossible glow in front of me. For what felt like an hour but was probably less, I followed that silent, unwavering sphere. It led me through terrain that I recognized later was the absolute edge of the scree gap. Past rock formations that I should have hit my head on, over terrain that was completely unskiable under normal circumstances. It wasn't really navigating me. It was simply defining the safe path, moment by moment. It never paused. It was relentless. Inside, I was screaming, trying to rationalize it as a weird atmospheric reflection, but the light was too perfect. It was leading me somewhere. Finally, the light moved ahead, slower now. It stopped, hovered just above the roof line of a small wooden structure. I recognized it instantly, an old emergency shelter on the lower slope. It was a place that I never would have navigated to in the whiteout. I skied the final few feet, exhausted. I stopped right at the shelter door. I looked up to thank whatever strange angel or demonic lure this was. As my hand reached for the rough wooden latch of the shelter, the light completely contracted in itself, like I was watching a star shrink, and then it completely vanished. No sound, no lingering flash, just immediate darkness, and the brutal muffling noise of the whiteout, rushing back in, swallowing the space where the light had been. I basically spent the night shivering in the shelter, but I survived. I know that I was rescued, but it wasn't by a person or a machine. It was by some sort of light. I know it sounds crazy, but it's real. That light cut through the worst cold that the mountain could offer, and it left the second I was safe. I've been back on the mountain hundreds of times. I never saw anything like it again. But I've always been curious if anyone else has seen something like it.